After the snow falls, the temperature plunges and the mud slides. Also tonight, more Americans are finding jobs, but Wall Street gets rattled and the Dow drops sharply. A star crashes to Earth, the latest on Harrison Ford. And Steve Hartman on the road with a story of undying love.
I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Scott is off tonight. I'm Charlie Rose. Spring begins in just 2 weeks, but there is no sign of it in much of the country. Cold temperature records were broken or tied in 34 cities, from Texas to New York, where the temperature fell to 29 below in Saranac Lake, the coldest spot in the nation. The winter storm that moved up the East Coast yesterday touched off mudslides today in West Virginia. Some residents of Mingo County had to evacuate. The state says it could take more than a month to clean it all up. But how do you get rid of the ice? Here's Jim Axelrod.
They just can't wait any longer for nature to do the job in eastern Michigan or many other parts of the country. Add today to the long, cold list of record-setting temperatures. Baltimore, Detroit, Birmingham, and Waco all set records for coldest March 6th ever. So did Montpelier, Vermont, where it was minus 16. But given March's trend from lion to lamb, forecasters say this month won't be anything like February, which saw monthly records set in cities like Buffalo, Toronto, and Cleveland. It wasn't the coldest February ever in Boston, just the snowiest, at nearly 65 inches, and maybe the one with the most bad backs.
My back hurts, my neighbor's back hurts, everybody's back hurts because it's nonstop shoveling.
There is a cost to all this bad weather. Early estimates from the insurance industry peg weather-related damage last month at more than $1 billion.
Well, for comparison, there is always Seattle, where people who like a touch of winter are not too pleased. Seattle just set a record for warmest February ever, 5 degrees warmer than normal, Charlie.
Thanks, Jim. Also heating up is the job market. The Labor Department reported today that the unemployment rate fell 0.2 of a point last month to 5.5%, lowest since the Great Recession. Employers in February added 295,000 jobs. The improving jobs picture has Wall Street worried that the Fed will raise interest rates. The Dow plunged 278 points. More now from senior business correspondent Anthony Mason. Anthony?
Winter hasn't put a freeze on hiring, Charlie, which was much stronger than expected in February. Wage growth is still sluggish. At 2%, it's just keeping up with inflation. But job growth is now the strongest it's been in 15 years. Surging since September, the economy's added an average of 293,000 jobs a month over the past half year. The unemployment rate's been dropping sharply among all racial and ethnic groups, especially Hispanics, who lost 700,000 jobs in construction alone during the recession, when Hispanic unemployment peaked at 12.7%. That's now been cut almost in half to 6.6%. Are you hiring right now?
Yeah, so
Andy Ananue runs a New York private investment firm that'll grow from 7 to 9 employees this year. Do you specifically look for Hispanic workers?
we do. If I have two people that I'm looking for, and one is bilingual and has a Hispanic background and one doesn't, and I'm going to be targeting the Hispanic market, I'd rather have somebody who is more adept and in tune with the culture.
Unanue, whose family started Goya Foods, the leading Hispanic-owned food company in the U.S., targets Hispanic companies for investment. Do you see this as a social issue or an economic issue, or both?
I think it's both. I think for the country, it's a social issue. I think for people running businesses, it should be an economic issue.
Because as the Hispanic population grows, it's becoming a potent economic force. By the end of this decade, Charlie, Hispanics are expected to account for more than 3/4 of the growth in hiring in the U.S.
Thanks, Anthony. One more financial note. Dow Jones is making a change in its 30 stock index, as it does from time to time. This time, it is adding Apple, the world's most valuable company, and removing AT&T. Tonight, a law enforcement official tells CBS News the Justice Department is preparing to file criminal charges against Democratic Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Questions have been raised about his ties with a close friend and donor. Here's Nancy Cordes.
The relationship between Senator Menendez and eye doctor Solomon Melgen has been under scrutiny for years. In 2013, Dr. Melgen's clinic in West Palm Beach, Florida, was raided by the FBI. He was accused of overbilling Medicare by $9 million. The senator's office contacted U.S. health officials to see if the charges could be disputed. Menendez is also accused of using his position atop the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to advocate on behalf of one of Melgen's investments, a port security contract in the Dominican Republic.
That is unacceptable.
The two-term New Jersey senator has always denied he helped Melgen in exchange for donations or gifts. In a statement today, his office said the senator has counted Dr. Melgen as one of his closest personal friends for decades. The two have spent holidays together. But those holidays have caused problems, too. In 2013, Menendez had to reimburse Melgen $58,000 for flights on Melgen's private plane. Flights Menendez had failed to report on gift disclosure forms 3 years earlier.
If the Justice Department does charge Menendez with corruption, he will face a challenging legal road ahead. Charlie, former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell was just sentenced to 2 years in prison for helping to promote the business of one of his wealthy friends.
Thanks, Nancy. CBS News has learned actor Harrison Ford broke an ankle and may have fractured his pelvis when he crash-landed a small plane yesterday near Los Angeles. Ford, who is 72, is still in the hospital tonight. Carter Evans has more.
Investigators surveyed the crash scene this morning before dismantling and hauling off Harrison Ford's vintage plane. Patrick Jones is with the NTSB.
The engine will be examined. The records of the aircraft will be examined.
The plane, seen here in amateur video, suddenly lost power just after takeoff, as suggested by Ford's last communication with the control tower.
53178, engine failure, immediate return.
Oh my God, I hope he's all right, dude.
But he couldn't make it back to the airport, so Ford, a seasoned pilot, aimed for a nearby golf course. The next best place, says pilot Mark Haney.
The way that he came in and landed the plane, that was not a crash, that was a landing. He knew what he was doing.
The Santa Monica airport has been embroiled in controversy for decades because it sits right in the center of densely packed neighborhoods. Ford's is just one of 16 small planes to crash near the airport over the last 20 years, many just feet from homes. In 2014, the actor joined other plane owners in a lawsuit to fight efforts to close the airport. Stephen Mooser lives just 4 homes away from the end of the runway. He took this picture of a plane that crashed into a neighbor's home in 2011.
We're concerned that a jet would go down on takeoff loaded with fuel, and people have said that it could burn as much as 6 square blocks.
It's still not clear what caused the engine on Ford's plane to fail, and Charlie, the NTSB, says the preliminary investigation could take up to a month to complete.
Thank you, Carter. This weekend marks 1 year since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, vanished without a trace. The search continues in a part of the Indian Ocean the size of West Virginia. Seth Doan has the latest.
Not a shred of evidence has been discovered. No debris, no life jackets, no seat cushions. There's no trace of the 239 people on board.
I mean, it's been almost a year, and I still am living my life assuming he's going to come back. His place is still here.
Sarah Bajak's partner, American Philip Wood, was a passenger.
How are you doing 1 year on?
Well, I realize that the likelihood that there's anybody still alive from that airplane is pretty infinitesimal, but it exists. And until that goes away, I'm not willing to stop fighting to find out what happened.
After 10 months of searching, Malaysian authorities declared Flight 370 was an accident, paving the way for families to receive compensation.
Why don't you tell us why you believe it's an accident? Show me the evidence that you have found to justify your declaration of accident.
Frustrated Chinese relatives also refused to accept the finding. 4 ships using sonar and an unmanned sub continue to search a section of the southern Indian Ocean, about the size of West Virginia. Working 12-hour shifts, they've scoured about 40% of the target area. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister recently acknowledged the search cannot go on forever.
What's your biggest fear right now?
My biggest fear is that we'll never learn what happened.
People here are just as mystified that this entire 777 aircraft could simply vanish. Charlie, the anniversary is a reminder here that the Chinese government could not do anything to find this plane either. So when protests pop up, they are quickly quieted.
One of the great mysteries. Thank you, Seth. 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl is just back from Argentina, where she's been investigating an intriguing mystery involving the death of a federal prosecutor. Leslie?
Charlie, the prosecutor, Alberto Nisman, was found dead after he made some incendiary charges against the president of Argentina and her foreign minister, that they conspired with Iran to cover up Iran's involvement in a terrorist attack in Buenos Aires. We did go to Argentina and sat down with the foreign minister, Hector Timerman, to talk at first about the old days in his country when people were assassinated or just disappeared. I've heard people talk about Argentina being drawn back into its dark past.
No.
Assassinations.
No. It's impossible. We're talking about things that were terrible, terrible.
One of the great mysteries is whether Mr. Nisman killed himself or whether he was murdered. So what do you think?
That I am part of that mystery. I don't know.
He's part of the mystery because he was one of Nisman's targets. The day after he died, the prosecutor was scheduled to appear before Congress to publicly present a 300-page report backing up his charges. He said that you, in 2011, met in Syria with your Iranian counterpart. He said that you said, and this is a quote in the report, Argentina is no longer interested in solving the attack, the bombing here. It prefers to improve its trade relations with Iran.
Well, that's a lie. That's a total lie. I never said that. Mr. Nisman never showed any evidence that I said that.
He didn't have that on tape or anything like that.
He cannot have something in tape because I didn't say it.
The case has gone global. People around the world want to know, was the prosecutor murdered? Was the government somehow involved? Or was it suicide? As of now, Charlie, it's a mystery.
I can't wait to find out. Leslie's full report will air this Sunday on 60 Minutes. The FDA makes a move that could lower the cost of some high-tech prescription drugs when the CBS Evening News continues. Today, the FDA approved what's called a biosimilar version of the cancer drug Neupogen. A study estimates biosimilar drugs could save Americans $44 billion over the next 10 years. More now from Dr. John LaPook.
20-year-old Joseph Mangan has an advanced form of a rare cancer called Ewing sarcoma. Following his chemo, he gets injections of Neupogen, a drug that helps bolster his immune system. He's covered under his mother Susan's health insurance, but over the past 8 months, the Neupogen alone has still cost them $1,200 out of pocket.
Has the cost of the Neupogen been on your mind over the past year?
Of course. The Neupogen itself, I know, puts a huge strain on our finances.
Neupogen is a biologic, a drug created using living cells, which makes it a more targeted form of treatment than a conventional drug. But what makes it so powerful also makes it hard to copy. Generic versions of conventional drugs are exact duplicates, but generic versions of biologics, called biosimilars, are closely related but not identical. Dr. David Henry is an expert on cancer drugs.
If we think of a generic like maybe building a townhouse, Neupogen is like building a skyscraper. It's much more complicated, many more pieces in place.
Because biosimilars are not exact matches of the original, some question whether they'll be as safe and effective as their branded predecessors. Dr. Janet Woodcock oversees the approval process at the FDA.
We are very confident, and if we approve a biosimilar, we are saying we expect this to have the same effects, benefits, and unfortunately side effects as the reference brand drug.
Right now, widely used biologic cancer drugs like Avastin and Herceptin can cost as much as $70,000 a year. But Charlie, today's ruling really ushers in a new era where these less expensive biosimilars are already in the pipeline.
Thanks, John. Still ahead, Steve Hartman on the road. But up next, Bill Plant returns to Selma 50 years after he covered the historic march. "50 years ago tomorrow, African Americans began a march from Selma to Montgomery to demand the right to vote. Among the reporters on the scene was Bill Plant. Bill returned to Selma for the anniversary.
50 years ago, the right to vote didn't apply to black citizens in places like Selma, and efforts to change that were resisted, sometimes violently. The attack on demonstrators in Selma that became known as Bloody Sunday shocked the nation. The memory is vivid for Sister Madeline Dorsey, now 96 years old, a Catholic nun who came face to face with police.
I have never, before or since, seen hate in the eyes like I saw that day and the whole time we were there.
How did it make you feel?
Sad that anyone could hate his brother.
The march went forward 2 weeks later, joined by thousands of volunteers and led by Dr. Martin Luther King. I was there for CBS News.
Tonight, the speeches and the star entertainment will drive home once again the point that they want their freedom and that they want it now.
A few months later, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and blacks did begin to vote and hold office. But in 2013, a Supreme Court decision rolled back a major part of the law. States with a history of discrimination no longer have to clear voting law changes with the Department of Justice.
We're much better off now than we were, but we are constantly losing ground.
Andrew Young, then a lieutenant of Dr. King, later a member of Congress and UN ambassador.
Changing precincts, purging voter lists, those kinds of things are still happening. We still don't have the unfettered right to vote.
And Charlie, 50 years after blood was shed here for the right to vote, the problem is not just that officials in some places can still make that difficult. In fact, many people just don't bother to vote. Here, for example, an official tells us that only about a third of this county, black or white, goes to the polls.
Bill, thanks so much. Bill will be talking to President Obama in Selma this weekend. Portions of the interview will air on tomorrow's CBS Evening News and on Sunday morning and Face the Nation. In the dead of winter, there's a place where daisies spring up every day. On the Road is next.
Tonight's On the Road segment is sponsored by Phillips Fiber Good Gummies, the tasty side of fiber.
Finally tonight, in a winter that's been cold enough to freeze your toes, Steve Hartman found two of the warmest hearts on the road.
There's really not a whole lot to do at Lakeside Park in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. At least, not in the winter. So why then, for the past couple months, have these two city workers been sneaking off on their own to shovel a walkway no one really needs to walk on?
For most people, it's a path to nowhere. Yeah, it's a path to somewhere for one person.
Jared Ebert and Kevin Schultz say they discovered that one person one snowy day.
He was in his car. He was in his car, and the snowbank was there.
Did you know what he was doing there?
Kind of put it together. It took us both back a little bit, thinking, my gosh, his devotion is that strong that he still comes when he can't make it to the bench even.
At the end of the walk, there's a bench dedicated to a woman named Betty Caldwell. And just based on the flowers, you can tell, she's still loved.
I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day.
Bud Caldwell says his wife loved that song, Daisy a Day.
And the four winds we know blow away.
So when he lost her a couple years ago, after 55 years of marriage, he got a bench in her memory and started taking her daisies every day he could. He thought no one was noticing. So imagine his surprise.
Yeah, one day I pulled up there and there's the walk shoveled.
What'd you think of that?
My knees about buckled on me.
Bud couldn't believe someone would go to such trouble.
Totally unexpected, you know.
We're just doing what we felt was our job.
I haven't read your job description, but I don't think it's in there.
Some intuition, be it divine or otherwise, says, you know, this is why you're here, to help one another.
Good afternoon, dear. Well, it's a nice day. Cold, but nice. Here's your daisy.
Sometimes, to make a difference in the world, you need a good idea. And sometimes, all you need is to recognize the good around you and clear the way for it.
See you tomorrow, Munchkin. Love you. Always did. Always will. I'll give you a daisy a day, dear. I'll give you a daisy a day. I'll love you until all the rivers run still, and the four winds we know blow away.
Steve Hartman, on the road in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
A story about warm hearts and daisies. That is the CBS Evening News. Scott's back next week. It's been an honor to sit in his chair. I'm Charlie Rose. I'll see you Monday on CBS This Morning. Good night.